So I do like to have a moment where we talk about the brain development involved in executive function. I like to call this my brain slide. I'm not a neuroscientist, but through functional MRIs, it has become pretty clear that the executive function circuits take place in the prefrontal cortex of our brains, the frontal lobes. And I think this is really important as educators for us to know and recognize because that's a part of the brain that doesn't really develop into our mid 20s. So to me, that means we need to be supporting this in elementary, middle, and high school because even if a child doesn't have maybe a stated executive function deficit, these skills are still developing. So us supporting the development of those skills is really benefiting all of our learners in the classroom. And I think, the Harvard Center on Developing Child talks about how as children start to develop these capacities, they need practice. They need practice reflecting on their experiences, talking about what they're doing, why they're doing it. They need practice monitoring their actions, considering possible next steps, and evaluating the effectiveness of their decisions or choices. Those are all things that they need practice doing. So I think it's helpful to think about we can implement strategies to allow that practice to take place, and practice over time will lead to improvement. I do like to say, I can't remember where this first came from, but early on in my days at Landmark, someone had talked about how, as educators, it can be helpful sometimes to think about our students being on a 100-step journey, and we may not be there for step 100, but the work we're doing here in step 30 is essential and especially needed to get to step 100. So I like to think about that, we can implement strategies now to help our students practice these skills, and we may only be at step 30 and we won't see them strengthen all of their executive function, but the practice we're doing now is so essential. So let's dig into executive function a little bit more. Like I said, I'm going to be referencing Harvard's Center on the Developing Child a lot. This um, this particular slide is just to kind of attribute to them these three areas, but lots of researchers these days agree on kind of the big three um, central skill areas when we think about executive function. And those are working memory, inhibitory control, and cognitive flexibility. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about each of them. Obviously, you could do a lot with each of these categories on their own, but just to give us a little bit of understanding about each. Working memory is that skill of holding and manipulating information in your mind so that you can use it. Students, we use working memory all the time. Students need it when they are in class all the time. They're using it when they're holding a teacher's question in mind and formulating their answer. Or when they're following multi-step directions, they're going to be using their working memory. Or when they're reading, they're constantly using their working memory to hold on to what came before as they process new information. That's one reason why, all of the routines, note taking that we can build in to reduce that cognitive load is helpful for our students when we think about the kind of taxing of the working memory that's going on in a classroom setting. When we think about inhibitory control, that's how we control our thoughts, our impulses, so that we can resist temptations or distractions. An example I like to give is, when a student is trying to listen to the teacher, but, a buddy is also whispering to them, they have to resist the temptation to listen to that buddy and instead direct their attention to what the teacher is saying, which is probably not quite as exciting or interesting to them. So they have to inhibit the response they want to give, the desirable thing, which is to talk to their friend. Um, in a lab setting, this is often tested through delayed gratification tests, kind of like the marshmallow test, which is a famous one, where child, usually their children, are given one marshmallow and told you can eat this marshmallow later, or you can wait and I'll give you two marshmallows and then you can. Oh, I just did it opposite, didn't I? Basically, the idea is if you do it now, you're going to get less marshmallow. You're going to have one. And if you wait, you'll get two. You'll get more marshmallows. The delayed gratification, students have to inhibit the response to want to eat it now so they can wait. And students often try to eat the marshmallow now. I'm going to talk about that test a little bit later as well as we kind of get into the complicated nuances that can go on with executive function. Cognitive flexibility is that piece I was sort of getting at with the forest and the trees. It's our ability to switch gears and adjust our strategies or our thinking. Um, so that ability to cognitive flexibility involves a lot. It's both the ability to see the big picture and the details, but it's also having to switch flexibly between rules, for example, or have to switch gears after recess when transitioning into math class, or shown through empathy, having to shift perspectives when we're reading or trying to understand our peers around us. So when working together and fluidly, executive function helps us coordinate to set a goal, sustain and maintain our attention and effort throughout, inhibit our responses to distractions, remember necessary information that's needed, and manage our emotions along the way so that we can flexibly adapt as needed to get things done. So, again, there's a lot going into executive function, even if it seems like a simple task that we're trying to get done.